Hello and welcome back to Russ's Movie Corner. My name is Russ, and as you can see, I am sitting in front of my movie corner. I have my Through Faith t-shirt on, my Son of God movie right next to me, and judging by the frame around me, we are back, taking down another atheist. Today on the chopping block is SciManDan and his video called Creationist Has Proof of Noah's Flood. And I just kind of scrubbed through a tiny bit of this footage just to kind of see what he was talking about, and I downloaded this around the time of Christmas, but because I was kind of in flux because of Christmas, and then last week I had a few other things going on, I wasn't able to get to it. So here we are, jumping into this video today. So without any further ado, this is another one that he's doing on Powell. For those of you that don't know, Matt Powell has a YouTube channel called Matt Powell Official, and he moved down to Dinosaur Adventureland in 2020 or 2021. He'd been doing a lot of different, like, apologetics work. He'd been doing a lot of different things, and Kent Hovind asked him to come down to Dinosaur Adventureland and see if he wanted to kind of help out down there. Teach people about God's creation, teach people about different things. So we're going to be talking again about Matt Powell. So without any further ado, let's jump into it.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
Now, I just wanted to stop this right here and just say this. Why is it that atheists believe in Christmas? Do they not understand what Christmas truly is? Literally, Christmas, Christ's Mass. It's literally about Jesus. Like, guys, get your own holiday. Seriously, get your own holiday. If you guys don't want us, to worry about that anymore, then go get your own holiday. Okay, maybe celebrate Darwin's birthday or something like that, and you can exchange birthday gifts on Darwin's birthday or something like that. Okay, but stop celebrating Christmas and stop saying Merry Christmas if you don't believe in Christ. Leave that to us. Thank you.
I hope you had a great day yesterday and ate everything you could eat and drank everything you could drink. I'm here today to provide some light entertainment to accompany your festivities. Now, Matt Powell is a creationist who loves to beat the 6,000-year-old Earth drum, and he continues to do so whilst never supplying any evidence for this whatsoever.
Actually, he has supplied plenty of evidence. You just sort of hand-wave it away and say, no, that's not evidence, that's not evidence, that's not evidence. In fact, people come into my comment section all the time whenever I do these videos and say the same damn thing. And I'm getting a little sick and tired of it. Okay? We have shown evidence. You just don't want to believe in the evidence because the evidence runs contrary to the supposed evidence that you think you have. Okay? So who's right? Who's wrong? Well, we're going to jump into that.
But something caught my eye this week where he released a video explaining why he believes in Noah's Ark. And his pinned comment was even more interesting as it read, Noah's flood is a fact of history.
As a matter of fact, it absolutely is. We'll get into that in just 1 second. Let me get through his intro here.
Hello all.
So, I have a document here that is time-tested. It's been backed up by a lot of archaeological finds. It has been backed up by various biblical scholars and even some atheist biblical scholars. What document am I talking about? This document right here. Okay? What do they have? They have a lawyer who hated that document, okay, who went out and said, oh, this layer is this many thousands of years old, and this one's tens of thousands of years old, and this one's this many tens of thousands of years old, and this one's hundreds of thousands of years old. A lawyer, by the way, named Charles Lyell. Okay? And then Darwin jumped on that and went, oh, wow, maybe that's true. Because he was a lazy bum and he didn't know anything about science, and he knew even less about the Bible, even though he had just graduated from Bible college. Because obviously he didn't believe in the Bible. Because he started believing in science. That it was some, and I mean science as in science, exclamation point, trademarked. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Doesn't work.
And welcome along to this Boxing Day edition of Tinfoil Tuesday with me, SciManDan. Thank you very much for joining me. Right, Matt Powell and his Noah's Ark video is the order of the day, so let's get on with it, shall we? We join Matt, let's remember, as he starts to tell us why he thinks that Noah's flood is a fact of history.
In the center of the United States, we find hundreds and hundreds of dinosaur graveyards. Each one of these dots that you see
Very true.
represents a graveyard that contains sometimes hundreds of thousands of fossils.
Yep.
Many of these dinosaurs are found fully intact, and we've discovered that they died from choking on mud.
That's not a fact, by the way. A credible explanation.
Okay, how is that not a fact? I mean, the way that they died shows that they died gasping and choking. Like, we know this because we have forensic science. Forensic science can show how people have died. Okay? And like, yeah, we find dinosaurs that we can't explain why they died. Okay? Now, what SciManDan is going to say is that, oh, what that really was is a meteorite hit the Earth, and then that dust choked the dinosaurs. Or something along those lines.
For sure, given the posture of the animal, etc., but far from conclusive.
Well, no, it's actually conclusive, dude, because if you look at how the animals died, that's how they died. That's conclusive proof of how they died. So, you can't say that's not conclusive when it is conclusive proof that that's how they died, because we have forensic science, dude. Otherwise, you don't believe in science, son. That is hilarious to me that you would sit there and go, well, maybe judging by the posture, maybe that's how they died, but that's not conclusive. Yeah, it is. Because according to forensics, forensics can work for paleontology as well as it works for, a person in a shallow grave. Okay? How do you think we know how people died? Okay? Because we started studying the effects of things on people, and then we learned how this is how this person could have died. This is how this person could have died. This is how this person could have died. And then they study the effects on a recently deceased body, and they do the same thing. They go, oh, I mean, this is the whole reason for, like, why cold case forensic science is a thing, is because people can look at recent murders and they can say, oh, this person died this way because, like, okay, let's say they died by poisoning. Okay, well, this person died by poisoning because we can see this, we can see that. And then they study that on the skeletal structure. And then they can go back and they can go, oh my gosh, see, we see this kind of melting around these bones, we see this kind of thing around this, and so we know that this person died by poisoning. Because they can study that in recently deceased, and they can see that in this. And that's what forensics has done for paleontology, because, they can study, okay, here's a drowning victim. Here's a person who drowned, terrified in a mudslide, okay? And when they dig up the body and they see the position that the body was in, they see the person was gasping and clawing and doing all this stuff, they see that, and they see animals that have done that, and then they go back and then they start studying in paleontology, and they start studying dinosaurs, and they go, these things died terrified. These things died by choking on mud because they were terrified. That's conclusive proof that that's how they died. Now, maybe not every single skeletal bone that we find, or skeletal remain that we find in the dirt is that way, but there are a lot of them that are that way. Which is conclusive proof that that's how they died.
And most fossilised dinosaurs were caused by mud or silt covering their deceased bodies. And
Yes. So how did they die? And where did the mud come from that covered their bodies? Those are two questions that you can't answer. And I guarantee you, he won't answer.
would have to have happened pretty quickly after their death.
Yes. Which means that... how did that happen? We have a mechanism for how that happened. You don't. You don't have a mechanism for that. Because you say that this layer that these dinosaur bones are in are 70 million years old, and that this layer above those is like 10 million years old. So there's a gap of like 60 million years in there. Where did that mud layer come from that covered all of these dinosaurs that would have created these fossils? Because we know that fossils form very quickly in terms of geologic time. Okay? We know that they form very quickly. We know that it doesn't take millions of years to form fossils. So how did that happen? We have a mechanism for that. It's called the flood. Okay? Because as the flood was going back and forth across the earth, okay, as the floodwaters were going, it would have carried mud and silt. Okay? And as those bodies died and as they fell down, they would have gotten covered over with mud. Yes, that much is true. We're not disputing that. We've never disputed that. And you'll notice that up above, it says dinosaur death pose. Okay? He's showing specific instances of dinosaurs that died terrified, choking on mud. How do we know? Because again, when we've had mudslides, when we've had other things, they examine the corpses of animals and people caught in those exact same poses. That's how they know that this is how they died. That's what I'm saying. This is conclusive proof.
And so you have to ask the question, what could cause a tsunami so big that it would encompass the entire United States, or at least half of the United States, and bury hundreds of thousands of creatures and sea life together, all in one large event?
And also, you have to wonder that most of those dinosaur graveyards, okay, were also along the edge of what we now call the Rocky Mountains. So, how would those have been buried and then uplifted into the Rockies? Think about that for a minute.
That's not how it happened, though. And besides...
Okay, any proof? Then how did it happen? He's saying that there had to have been some kind of a wave, okay, that picked up a whole bunch of mud, okay, and covered the entire eastern side of the United States, from basically where the Rocky Mountains are today, okay, all the way to the East Coast. That's what he's asking, is what happened. He's not saying that's how the flood happened. He's saying if uniformitarianism is your thing, passes the key to the present, then how was it that these dinosaurs died choking on mud and terrified if there's no proof that there was ever a tsunami that came that far? There would have had to have been some kind of a tsunami wave that came across the United States, okay, and then carried those corpses to that point. Now, as I said, we have a mechanism for that, okay? And it's Genesis 6 through 9. Alright? We have a mechanism for that. It's called the flood. What Matt Powell is asking is, how then did the dinosaurs die those deaths? So come on, Dan. If you don't think that's how it happened, then how did it?
Fossil ages range from around 250 million years to 65 million years ago.
No, they don't. No, they don't. That's the age ranges that your science, exclamation point, trademark, put on those layers of dirt. And you don't know where those fossils were dug up. And you yourself said, Dan, that that some of those probably did die that way, but it's not conclusive. Because you don't have an answer for it, and you don't go get an answer. You're not answering the question, Dan. That's the point of these debunked videos, is to point out he's not answering the question. He's sidestepping the question by saying, well, see, we know that these layers are from 65 to 230 million years old. No, that's what your side of this argument says. Okay? You're not answering the question of what happened that covered them so quickly, so that they preserved enough to become fossilized, which you yourself agreed had to happen. Come on, Dan. Answer the question now.
For example, a T-Rex lived closer to us in time than it did to a Stegosaurus. There is...
How do you know that? Oh, is it because it was in this layer and not this layer? Is that what you're saying? That it's in this layer and not this layer, so ergo it's a... No. It's because the T-Rex is bigger. It would have taken it longer to die than a Stegosaurus. Stegosauruses are very close to the ground. Okay? And they don't run very fast. So what would have happened to them? They would have gotten trapped in the floodwaters and died. They would have gotten trapped in mud, and they would have died faster than a T-Rex. Ergo, they would be in a lower layer than a T-Rex. Okay? Due to hydrologic sorting, which is an actual mechanism that Kent Hovind and Matt Powell, and by extension Ken Ham and all of the other scientists and Answers in Genesis and other Christian scientists subscribe to. That is an actual thing. And we've said before, go get yourself a jar of dirt, put some water in it, shake it up, set it down, you'll come back, you'll find it in layers. Hydrologic sorting. Look it up. It's an actual thing in geology. Okay? And that's exactly how we find the fossil record. Okay? Is due to hydrologic sorting. Because we find certain layers are higher because things like sandstone and that kind of stuff is lighter, ergo it would be at the top, versus, you know, clays and igneous rocks and granites, which would be down towards the bottom. Okay? So you have your more solid rocks and your bigger clasts, okay, which are the actual size of the rocks, are going to be down at the bottom, whereas your smaller grains, like your sands and your silts and all that kind of stuff, are going to be near the top, which is what we find in the supposed fossil record, in the layers of dirt in the earth. Okay? The layers of sandstone are nearer to the top than the layers of granites and other bigger clasts, which are down at the bottom. Because they're heavier. Duh. And anyone who's studied geology knows this. Because it's one of the first things you're taught when you learn geology. Okay? Dan here doesn't know geology. He doesn't know about hydrologic sorting. And so to him, his only knowledge of geology is, well, my science book, exclamation point, trademark, told me that this layer was this many millions of years old, this layer was this many millions of years old, this layer was this many millions of years old, this layer was this many millions of years old. And so, the T-Rex is in this layer, which is 70 million years old, and the Stegosaurus is in this layer, which is this many millions of years old. It's older, see? So, that layer, obviously, is older than this layer. No, it's not. Because you can't prove that. Not with radiometric dating, and not with index fossils. Because literally, index fossils are just, hey, X fossil is in X layer, so it's X millions of years old. X fossil is in this layer. Well, how do you know that that layer is that many millions of years old? Well, because it's got this fossil in it. Well, how do you know that that fossil is this many millions of years old? Because it's in that layer. It's circular reasoning, Dan, and you don't even understand that. Hence why you don't have any proof. You haven't provided a single shred of proof as for why your theory is the way it is.
No way that one event could bury the two of them at the same time.
Yes, there is. Because we have absolutely seen this, okay, at Mount St. Helens. We know that single events can bury creatures very quickly, very rapidly. We've seen it in flooding, by the way. We've seen it in mudslides, by the way. And yes, we have seen the same layers that form in the dirt, okay? When a mudslide happens, it forms the same layers that we see in the geologic record, which only exists, funnily enough, in textbooks. Because the supposed geologic record is just layers of dirt. That's all it is. And he doesn't want to believe that there is proof for that. That the only proof that they have is that those layers are millions of years old, somehow, and as if by magic. But they don't have any proof of that. Because they made it all up. It was made up in the 1830s by Charles Lyell. Again, a lawyer from Scotland. And it's hilariously funny to me that people will go, oh, Ron Wyatt was an anesthesiologist. He wasn't an archaeologist, even though he brought archaeologists with him. He wasn't an archaeologist. Yet they'll look at Darwin, who was a Bible school graduate who couldn't get a job at any church in England, and Charles Lyell, who was a lawyer and a virulent atheist, and go, oh, those guys are two of the seminal people in science! Exclamation point, trademarked. Hypocrite much? You believe fallible humans over a time-tested document. Yeah, good luck with that.
Despite them both being found in the US.
There is no other option other than a global flood.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to get a fossil, you have to have rapid burial.
Yeah.
And so that's the only explanation.
Because again, if you look at this map, okay, you look at the concentrations of where those things are. Where are they? Where is this? Folks, this is the Rocky Mountains. Okay? That's literally where the Rocky Mountains are. Okay? Now, some of them are, further west or further east of that, but a lot of them are right along in the foothills of the Rockies and even on the slopes of the Rockies. Okay? Which means that at some point where the bodies ended up, there was an uplift. Gee, almost as if a mountain range formed right there and split the waters in two. Huh. Gee, don't we call that a continental divide? Yeah. It's called a continental divide. I've actually stood on it, by the way. When I went to Yellowstone, which, funnily enough, is right there. Which is a volcano. Okay? So, yeah. He's absolutely correct in saying that we cannot account scientifically, using current scientific theories, we cannot account for why those dinosaurs are found right there. Now, we can account for why some of them are found over here and along the eastern seaboard. Okay? Because that would have been as the Appalachians came up and the water came in, it would have stopped them. Or if there was some kind of a continental shelf at the time, that would have stopped some of that from happening. Okay? But most of them, yes, are found out here in the west. At the Rockies of the United States. And yes, there absolutely was a global flood that caused that. because there's no other explanation for it. And if you start doing some research on it, you'll start finding that they don't know. The current theory, and this is why I mentioned it before, the current theory is that there was a meteor strike. They're not sure exactly where it was. Some people say it was down here by the Yucatan Peninsula in the Gulf of Mexico. Some people say it was elsewhere. There's a whole bunch of theories for it, okay? But they don't know exactly what happened. They'll just say a meteorite impacted and it threw out all of this material, and that's what buried all of the dinosaurs and killed them all. But does that explain rapid burial in mud? No, that doesn't. Because that doesn't explain why we find dinosaur fossils in Europe, why we find dinosaur fossils in Asia, why we find dinosaur fossils in South America and Africa in the same layers that we find them here. Okay? Because if a Stegosaurus lived, so many millions of years before a Tyrannosaurus Rex, then what killed the Stegosaurus? Because we would have had multiple impacts to bury multiple layers, right? So that doesn't explain why, this one's 70, this one's 100, this one's 230. That doesn't explain that. Okay? That's what I'm saying. You, as the atheist, have to come up with the explanation of how did it happen. We're saying we have a document that tells us how it happened. You don't want to believe in that document. That's fine. That's up to you. Your willing ignorance of the evidence of this document is another thing. Okay? Completely different thing. But, beyond that, what does your theory say? You don't have a unified theory that says this is what happened 230 million years ago, 100 million years ago, 65 to 70 million years ago. You don't have a unified theory. Because all I've ever heard in any one of my earth science and or geology classes that I've ever taken in my life, all they've ever said is there was a meteorite impact that caused the dinosaurs to be snuffed out. But that didn't happen for millions of years. Okay? That couldn't have happened for millions of years. Because we know from, explosions of volcanoes and stuff like that, that while, particulates can be in the air for 6 months to a year, eventually they sort out. Eventually they fall back down to Earth. You don't have particulates floating around for millions of years. So we didn't have some miraculous impact of some super gigantic asteroid that covered the Earth, it blanketed the Earth for millions of years. It didn't happen that way. It couldn't have happened that way. Because it would have snuffed out all life. And that means that you would have had no life to survive to continue, unless, as the story of Earth so eloquently says, somehow and as if by magic. Because that's literally what the story of Earth said. And by the way, that was written by 2 PhDs. And produced by National Geographic. If you don't believe me, go look it up. National Geographic, The Story of Earth, 2011. Somehow and as if by magic.
Why we would find these dinosaurs buried and preserved in the positions that we find them.
If that was the case, then you'd be finding dinosaurs in every single area of Earth.
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. Because as the mud is pushing along on the seafloor, okay? Because that's what happens during flooding, okay? As the mud is pushing along, it would have buried the bodies and then carried them along with them. Okay? We saw this in Mount St. Helens. We've seen this in flooding. We've seen this in landslides. Because you'd have to explain to me then, Dan, why does a mudslide not leave, parts of people all the way up on the top of the mountain? Why don't they? Why don't they leave them halfway down the mountain? Why don't they leave them 3/4 of the way down the mountain? Why are they all at the bottom? Duh. Are you that daft, son? Yes, the answer is yes, he is that daft. Because you'd have to be some kind of a non-scientist to not understand that when you have solid matter, it tends to carry things with it on the leading edge. Okay? Go look at Nisqually Glacier on Mount Rainier. Or go to any mountain that has glaciers on it. The leading edge of the glacier is all rocks and dirt and dust. Further up, it's all ice and snow. The first time that I went and saw Nisqually Glacier, I didn't understand. I thought that the glacier, because I was taught that a glacier is ice and snow. Okay? And it wasn't until I had studied geology. And the guy goes, they're teaching it wrong in earth science classes. The leading edge of glaciers is rocks and dust. Because as that glacier moves forward, it picks up all the rocks and dust with it. So if you go search for a picture of Nisqually Glacier, and Nisqually Glacier, literally the beginning of it, where the river comes out, okay, there's like a little hole at the base where a little river comes out, where that is, okay, literally, you look at that, and for about a half a mile up the glacier, okay, half a mile to a mile up the glacier, it's all rocks and dust. And then it turns into ice, and then it goes all the way up to the top of the mountain as ice. But it picks up rocks and dust as it moves down the mountain. Okay? As it retreats in the summer and as it moves in the winter, as it moves back and forth, it picks up rocks and dust. And that rocks and dust stays on the front edge of the glacier. It's all held together by ice, but it's all rocks and dust, held together with minuscule ice crystals. Okay? Alluvial fans? Again, geology. Hello? Alluvial fans. Whenever you have a washout, it always comes out in a fan-like shape. So, yeah, we absolutely do have a mechanism for why all of those are on the Rockies, in and around the Rockies. Duh! They were carried there by the mud, you moron! Again, do you not understand basic physics? No, he doesn't. He is not SciManDan, he is ScamManDan. Okay? That's why I've called him ScamManDan, because he doesn't know basic science, folks. Basic physics, basic chemistry, basic evolution theory. He knows nothing. And I've had people come to me and be like, you don't know anything. I'm like, okay, where am I wrong? Well, you just don't know anything. That's not an argument. The reason why I'm saying he doesn't know anything is listen to his words. He hasn't answered the question. And he doesn't even know that absolutely yes, as mud comes and picks up bodies and covers them, it's going to carry them along. And if you look back at the map, yes, we absolutely do find dinosaur bones in various places around the U.S. They may not be evenly spread. They probably wouldn't have been evenly spread. But as they got buried by the mud, as the mud was moving, okay, that's where it would have gone. And when it got to a point where it stopped, because the mountains were starting to uplift, that's where they would have stopped. Because they would have run into a harder surface, and they would have gotten stuck. It's basic physics. I mean, this is something that I learned at Perry Tech when I studied there. It's basic physics. It's part of flow. Like, literally, as an instrumentation technician, that's what we learn in flow. That when you have certain types of viscous fluid mediums, okay, they do absolutely pick stuff up and carry them with them on the leading edge. And if you'd studied physics, you'd know that, Dan.
Yet there are some areas where we find no dinosaur fossils at all.
Well, we haven't found any yet. We found bones in certain places. We found minuscule bones in certain places that we're not sure what those bones are. They could be dinosaur bones. They could be other animal bones from the flood. We could have dug in the wrong places. They could be in people's backyards, you know, feet down, but they could be in people's backyards that we've just never gotten to because people live there. How do we know that there are no fossil bones there? Have you looked? Have you gone out with certain equipment and looked? Have you gone out and asked people, can we dig in your backyard to see if we can find some dinosaur bones? Oh, and by the way, we're going to be digging down about, 200 feet. Because we need to get through a lot of the layers to get down to see where the bones are. Have you done that? No? Oh, well, I assumed you had, considering you said that we haven't found anything. You have to remember, where they're digging, there are no people. And sometimes when they're digging through, they're digging into the mountainsides, which would take you through layers. So they're sometimes digging underneath where people live, like, Denver, for instance. There's a whole mass of, mines and stuff around Denver. It's why the city grew up where it was. Because all the mines were down the hillside. So they built the city above the mines so that the people could walk down to get to work every day.
For example, there are large swathes of land in central Australia where we have found none.
Yes! And why do you think that is, Dan? Why do you think that is? Where are the high places? The high places are on the edges. The flat land is out in the middle of Australia. All the highest places are on the edges. Okay? That's where the high places are. All of the mountainous regions in Australia are on each coast. The only high place that's in the middle of the country is Ayers Rock, and that's a sand plume, son. That's just an uplift of sand that dried. Literally. It's just a big sandstone rock out in the middle of nowhere. Okay, it's a sand plume. But the mountainous regions are out near the edges of the continent, okay, of Australia. So for him to sit there and be like, oh, well, Australia, we find all the dinosaurs on the edges. Why don't we find any in the middle? Duh, again. Hello. Where are the high regions? It's where they would have gotten stuck because the harder rock would have been rising up and it would have stuck the sand on top of it. Okay? Duh. Just like a continental shelf. Come on, man. Think about it for a minute.
And within some of these dinosaurs, we find preserved blood cells. Now, the blood cells were analyzed by different scientists, and we found that they actually died from drowning. And so, once again, you have to ask the question, what could cause waves so huge that they would hit in the center of the United States?
This is the fundamental question. okay, that science, exclamation point, trademarked, has to answer, is what would have caused these dinosaurs to die in this way. And again, how are cells, living cells, being preserved for millions of years? Because we know nothing lives for millions of years. Okay? Not even the people of the Bible live for millions of years. But that's beside the point. Point being, we know that living tissue doesn't survive for millions of years. Okay? It would turn to dust long before then. So they can't be millions of years old with tissue still attached to them. They can't be. They just can't be. Okay? Now, you could argue that if a mosquito, like Jurassic Park, if a mosquito were to, bite a dinosaur and, get stuck in sap and then turned into amber, okay. Then maybe you could, because that's preserving something in something solid. Okay? But this is not like they've actually found like actual dinosaur skin. They found muscle tissue. They found marrow. Okay? You can't preserve that for millions of years, folks. It's just not going to happen. That's an actual scientific fact, by the way. Something that science just blows by because they can't answer that question. Okay? So it becomes the question for them to answer is how big of a wave has to come across the United States to bury people and animals and stuff like that. Okay?
States all the way from the oceanic coast.
Well, 150 million years ago, the Earth's continents looked very different than they do today.
No, they didn't. Because you can't prove that. But even so, what? Are you going to shave off from, say, the Appalachians to the coast? Is that what you're going to do? You still have the problem, Dan, of how big was the wave. And if the Appalachian Mountains are so old, so incredibly old, that they've eroded away to the point where they're at now, that means that they would have been at the height of the Rockies. Which means, where did the wave to bury these creatures come from? Because now you're talking about a wave that has to come up and over 14,000 feet. Or more. Depending on how big they say the Appalachians were at that time. You're talking about a hell of a lot of water there, son. Whereas we have a very, very simplistic explanation for it. A global flood. And it absolutely does account for the fact that, yeah, the Earth probably did look different in Adam and Eve's time, 6,000 years ago, from the flood, 4,400 years ago, which drastically changed the entire Earth surface into what we see today. Because the other thing you have to ask yourself is, that desert that's right behind Dan's head there, the Sahara Desert, that desert right there, okay? Why is it only 4,300 years old? Oops. Probably because there was a flood. That's the largest desert we have on Earth. And when the scientists went out and studied it, they found that it's 4,300 years old. That's it. So why is the oldest desert on Earth only 4,300 years old? I have a theory about that. 6,000 years ago, God created everything. 4,400 years ago, there was a flood. 4,300 years ago, the desert started. There you go.
And most fossils that have been found are from animals that live very close to lakes or rivers. And their remains were covered shortly after.
Actually, you don't know what their actual habitats were. Okay? Yes, they're found near lakes and rivers today, but that's because that's where we see their remains resting. Because, like, okay, why are there no dinosaurs in Minnesota? There's lakes and rivers there, right? Why are there no fossilized remains along the Mississippi River? I mean, that one floods regularly, right? So obviously we should have a lot of dinosaur fossils by that river, should we not? If the past is the key to the present, if uniformitarianism is true, then why don't we see millions of dinosaur fossils and bones along the shores of the Mississippi River? Or along the Columbia River between Oregon and Washington State? Again, you don't know, Dan, what their habitat was. You don't. You can't say with certainty it was this or it was this. You don't know, son. You don't. And that is the fundamental thing. See, what they do is when they find something, okay, they look around and they see what they can try to see, and then they look around to see what's around, and they go, oh, well, see, there's some ancient rivers and some ancient lake beds over here, so, oh, obviously they must have lived by these places that did this. How do you know that was their habitat? That's where they died, but how do you know that's where they lived? Maybe they were migrating and some of them died and got covered up. You don't know. That's the point. And the funniest thing is that these guys will stand there and say that we Christians are the ones that don't know anything. When we put these questions to them, and they never answer them. Again, he hasn't answered a single question. He's made a lot of statements, but he hasn't answered the fundamental questions that have been asked. He's made a lot of assumptions. Oh, that's because that was what their habitat was. How do you know that's what their habitat was? Were you alive 65 million years ago, 70 million years ago, 100 million years ago, 230 million years ago? Oh, you weren't. Okay. Did you make a time machine and go back in time and study that? No? Okay. Then shut up. You don't know what their stuff was. Because paleontologists don't even know what their stuff was. They just go by what they find in those dirt layers. And then they make some inferences based on that. Okay? They go, oh, they had some ferns. Oh, there was an ancient riverbed. Oh, see, this must have been a river. So, these guys must have been like hippos in Africa. They must love to, swim around in this stuff. Do they know that? No. It's because they found the fossils by certain things. And they say, oh, because we found these type of fossils and these bones, then these must have lived near these. That's it. But they don't know that that's absolutely where they lived, because that's where they died. Because you can't tell me that T-Rex had any babies. You don't know that it had any babies. And you don't know if those babies lived or died. Or even if they changed in anything. You don't know that Stegosaurus had any babies. All you know about those bones is that they died. You don't know if they passed on any genes. You don't know if they actually had any children. Okay? You don't know what their life was like before they died. All you know is they died. And so all paleontologists do to try to get some kind of a picture for the textbooks and for scientific journals is they come up with, oh, they were near some, plants that we know grow near waterways. So we think they lived near lakes and rivers. And so when people go in and draw those beautiful little pictures that you see in your textbooks and you see in those dinosaur books for kids, that's all based on inference. It has no basis in actual scientific fact. Because it is not a scientific fact. The scientific fact is they died. And it is a scientific fact that we know that they died by drowning. Now, Did some of them maybe die before that? Yes. Some of them could have died by other means. Okay? One of them could have been running away and just keeled over of a heart attack. We don't know. Okay? And then got covered up. The point is, we don't know. All we can do is look at the bones, look at the tissue, look at the stuff, and see how did they die. But that doesn't give us a clue to how they lived. Because we don't know. We weren't there. And if you were there, you'd have died too. Because whatever killed them would have killed you too. Because if you were to take a time machine back to a cataclysm like a global flood or a meteorite impact or anything like that, you would die too. Sorry to say. Then where would you be? Right back where you started. You'd be dead and nobody would be any the wiser. Because you wouldn't be coming back to say, hey guys, I went there and this is what I observed. Sorry. It's not how it works, son. We'll go a little bit more and then we'll call it an episode.
Or they died in the water. And this is a much more feasible explanation than the ocean reaching the entirety of the inland.
No, Don. You're trying to say that somehow, and as if by magic, a T-Rex was flooded out and killed in a waterway. Because you said that dinosaurs lived by lakes and rivers. Lakes don't flood, son. So how would a T-Rex drown in a lake? I think you could probably figure out I don't go that far in to get a drink. Because if I do, I can't really swim. My arms just aren't big enough. Okay? So for him to drink, what would he have done? He probably would have gotten in up to about his thighs and then reached down like this and drank. Okay? Because lakes don't flood, son. Rivers flood. And you're telling me that you had a flood powerful enough to knock certain animals off their feet and drown and get covered in mud. Because they're not just going to drown and get covered in mud. Because bodies float, son. They would have had to have been weighed down somehow until the mud came and covered them, if that's the case. But the question remains, why would we be seeing dinosaur fossils along the Rocky Mountains? And Matt Powell is asking the question. He's not saying that this is what happened. He's asking the question to you, the atheists out there, including Dan. Okay? Is this what happened? Because we see these all the way up against the Rocky Mountains. Now, could there have been a wave big enough to flow inland from the Pacific over some of the burgeoning mountain ranges at the time, like the Cascades up to the Rockies? Maybe. But you're talking about a hell of a lot of water if you want to go from the Atlantic coast all the way to the eastern side of the Rockies. That's not going to happen, folks. It's just not going to happen. But that's the point that Matt Powell is bringing up. He's saying, how much water do you have to have that comes in and floods so that we get this concentration of animals here? Because you'd have to have some kind of a massive wave to be able to do that. This scene, by the way, is from 2012, the movie. The Roland Emmerich disaster film, 2012. By the way, I've never seen. I watched about 10 minutes of it and I turned it off because it was stupid. Okay? It was all CG. It was crap.
Noah's flood is the explanation
It is.
for these things. In fact, it is the only explanation. And this is why we find whales perfectly preserved on top of mountains. Now, how could whales have possibly gotten to the top of certain mountains? This is also why we find whales in the desert.
Yeah, the thing is, Matt, those areas were not mountains and deserts when that animal died.
You literally just confirmed Kent Hovind and Matt Powell. You, Dan, literally just confirmed what Kent Hovind has been saying since 2005 on his creation seminars, and before that, because he's been doing it for a long time prior to that too. But my point is that literally his sentence there, his statement of this is how, because there wasn't these things there before they died, that's literally what Kent Hovind's been saying. So thank you, Dan. You just confirmed the flood. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You just confirmed that the flood happened. Because Kent Hovind has been asking that same exact question for years now. Saying, how is it that we have clams in the closed position, fossilized clams in the closed position on the top of Mount Everest? And how do we have, whale fossils and marine fossils on top of mountains? And he literally says, because of Noah's flood, because the mountains weren't there when the flood happened, and then after the flood, those mountains uplifted. So thank you, Dan. You literally just confirmed exactly what Kent Hovind's been saying for years. Thank you, thank you, thank you, sir. I applaud you. Now go read John and Romans and become a Christian, because obviously you know nothing about what you speak. Because honestly, SciManDan over here doesn't have a clue of what he speaks. Because honestly, when I first learned about some of the stuff in geology and some of the stuff in biology, I thought, how in the hell is this even possible? And it wasn't because I was a Christian. It wasn't because I believed in the Bible. I didn't become a Christian until 1997. Okay? Before that, I believed there was a God. I believed there was a Jesus. I didn't know what it meant to be a Christian. Nobody told me how to become a Christian or anything like that. I thought I was a Christian because I believed in Jesus, not as my personal Lord and Savior, but I just believed in Him. I thought that was enough. Oh, there's a Jesus. Okay, I'm a Christian. That's what I believed. Okay? But sitting in school, learning some of this stuff, I'm going, it does not make any sense. And then when I sat in geology, I was a new Christian. I still didn't know that Bible that much. I still didn't know a lot about the Bible at the time. I was actually studying it in Sacred Books of the World. And I'm studying geology, and I'm going, how does this make sense to anyone? Like, the gaps in time just don't add up. It doesn't make any sense that this layer would be 70 and this layer would be 100. What happened to the 30 million years in between them? Where are the 30 million years of erosion marks? Why hasn't that layer eroded back to almost nothing, if that's the case? I mean, you're talking 30 million years of erosion here, folks. That layer shouldn't exist in 30 million years. Or it would have had to have been one thick-ass layer. And I'm talking thick, okay? Like the size of a building thick, to be able to erode back to the layers that we see in the dirt now. But we don't have a top layer that's that thick. That's only, 30,000 years thick, 40,000 years thick, however thick they think they're, however big they think this layer is. Okay, to the next one. That layer should be a lot thicker than what they're saying it is. But again, Matt Powell here, right here, is correct. There is a mechanism that explains everything. And SciManDan confirmed it. Those things weren't there. True. It happened after the flood. Because we know rapid geology is a thing. Been saying it for years now. We know rapid geology is a thing. Okay? Because Mount St. Helens shot a lot of holes in geology when it went off in 1980. And the ensuing discoveries that people have made over the years has really shot holes in this whole notion of, oh, it's this many millions of years old, this many this or this many. Yeah, they've shot holes in that numerous times. So thank you, Dan, for confirming the Kent Hovind hypothesis, confirming the Bible. I hope you become a Christian, my man. I really do, because you really need Jesus. Smash that like button, hit subscribe, drop a comment below. Let me know what you think of this series so far. And probably be 2, maybe 3 videos long. It'll depend on how far we get in the next one. And as we say, we will see you on the next one.